Welcome to the show, Dr. Shabir.
Pleasure to be on.
So we're exploring a new segment within our Crisis of the Faith series called within the category of personal trauma. So just, in terms of young people or even other individuals that you've seen, how often have you seen sort of personal trauma cases related to sort of crisis?
I have to say that often these are not the cases that come to me.
Mm-hmm.
Usually I'm sought out to deal with the cases where somebody has like a philosophical objection or something like this.
Based on your expertise, obviously.
Well, I mean, I don't claim an expertise in that, but I do try to help, and I do my research and try to help young people who have questions about that. But if somebody has like a real crisis of faith, which we know to be happening often due to some personal trauma, probably they suffer alone and they don't actually bring that to the attention of an imam. But we know it is happening, and we need to be alert to that. We need to address that as an issue within the community.
Why do you think it's sort of becoming increasingly common? Because I'm sure, personal trauma or like things that shake up one's life, like death of someone, loss of a child, etc., happened in the past as well. But the idea of that stuff leading to you having a crisis of your faith, I mean, a few years back we wouldn't hear that. So do you think something happened, or do you think it's always happened but people didn't talk about it, but now because crisis of the faith is something that people are sort of talking about, and that's why it's coming out?
Yeah, from my humble research on this, it looks like it's been happening for a long time. People didn't talk about it that much. But now, in retrospect, people are doing surveys and they're trying to find out, for example, how did the Holocaust affect its victims? So it is found that actually some people increased their faith as a result of the suffering, and some people lost their faith as a result. So it seems to go both ways. Not only with the Holocaust, but with other sorts of suffering as well. It seems that in the midst of suffering, some people feel their faith getting stronger. They become more reliant and dependent on God, closer in contact with God. Some people, on the other hand, lose their faith. And that reminds us of something that is actually at the very basis of Muslim thinking, that we're always under test. And God, by using various tests, is separating wheat from chaff. Now, I don't want to say that and sound callous towards the suffering of those who are actually having this crisis of faith. We need to encourage those individuals to come forward to talk about their sufferings and the crisis that they're going through. We need to help them to make sense of that situation. But that was the first thing that kind of struck me as I did some humble research about this, like about the large numbers, with some people going towards faith, some people going against, in the midst of and as a result of this kind of personal trauma. But we need to now forget about those who are strengthened by this, because that's not the problem. We need to think of how we can help the persons who are losing the faith as a result of personal trauma.
And I guess just to comment on the Crisis of the Faith series online, it's doing, like, we are getting a lot of views. So it's clear that, well, it's good that we're getting a lot of views on our show. It's clear that it's sort of a struggle that people are dealing with. So
yes, and whatever we can do to help them with that struggle, it'll be our duty and our pleasure to comply. Now, one of the things that we're taught about in Islam is that we have to have patience. And I know it's easier to say it when you're not the one suffering, but there has to be somebody who gives the reminder, and that's our duty at this point, because the Quran says, وَذَكِّرْ فَإِنَّ ذِكْرَ تَنْفَعُ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. Remind, because reminder is beneficial for the believers. So sometimes we need to hear somebody say it, and remind us that that's what we ought to do. We have to have patience in the face of suffering, and in the light of the loss of a loved one, or something like this. The other thing is that the Quran assures us that God does not burden us with more than we can actually bear. So there is a kind of a fail-safe mechanism, so that yes, we suffer, but there's only so much we can bear, and then God gives us the relief after that. So the Quran says, "Inna ma'al usra yusra, inna ma'al usra yusra." With difficulty, there is ease. There is ease. So it is repeated. God is assuring us that the ease will definitely come. So we shouldn't be overburdened with the difficulty, difficult as it is. is at a certain point, we have to remind ourselves that God is in full control. That's one of the things we're taught. There is only one God. There's not like a good God and an evil God. Evil God strikes us with calamities, and the good God cannot do anything about it. There is only one God, and He is in control of all affairs, and He allows for suffering to happen to a certain extent. And sometimes we ask, why me? It may be me because of some random process that God allows to function within broader parameters of control. So He controls the broader parameters, but He allows for a certain randomness in between. Within that randomness, I could be the one struck at random. So we shouldn't despair over that. Like sometimes somebody may have the idea, it looks like I've done something wrong. It may not necessarily be something that you have done wrong. It may just be part of a random process, as a result of which, for example, you have a debilitating illness or disease. But what do you do in that circumstance? If you are patient, then God will give you a reward in the life hereafter for the suffering that you have here. So the suffering is not without some kind of good outcome, and it is definitely not pointless. Otherwise, if there's no God, if somebody says, okay, I lose faith, I'm not going to believe in God anymore because I'm suffering in this way, well, you still have the suffering, and there's no assurance, no hope, no future for you, no positive outcome in all of this. But with the idea that there is God, in fact, even the suffering becomes easier to bear, because you know that it is not pointless. Something good will come out of this in the long run.
How do you, so I want to talk about a specific point that you said where, God tells us to be patient. And I've often heard, I guess mostly from young people too, that, when they're going through things and they go to an imam or a community leader, the response is, no matter how traumatic the situation, their response is, well, just be patient and that's all you can do. How do you, I guess, make sense of that? Because it's like you're going through something that's completely shaken up your life, and yes, you have to be patient, and that's all you're being told. So how do you, I guess, that's been, I think, a point of contention for a lot of people as well.
Yeah. Well, of course, the imams cannot do much more than this, but I wish we had resources to do more. For example, if we had resources, financial resources as an example, to help people to cope with financial loss or loss of a job, or at least to help them in some way with a little bit of a cushion to help them through a disaster, which is not necessarily financial, but a little bit of money in a situation like that would help. But then it's not only money, it's human resources. What about human resources? I wish that the Islamic centers would be organized such, including our very own, such that we have, like, on hand a good set of volunteers, people who are there to comfort individuals in situations of grief, to be there with them, spend quality time with them, help them with some of their chores and their difficult situations, so that they feel that they're not alone and they're not suffering alone, but there's a whole community gathered around them, sharing their pain and their grief, and working with them to overcome this.
I guess the one point that I remember is someone saying, they went to an imam because they were like sexually assaulted as a child. And they shared this, and the response from the imam was, well, there's not much I can do, just be patient and you'll be fine. Sort of that was the response. So is that, as an imam, when you're going there and you're sharing this, is that sort of the right, like, how do you know what I mean? Like, how do you sort of help that person while staying true to the idea of patience, but knowing that it's sort of a much bigger issue? And I take your point about, having the right resources and seeking help.
Yeah. Well, the advice about patience comes in more acutely when we're dealing with something that we cannot do anything about. But if there has been something like a sexual assault, then that is still something we can do something about, and we should rather do something about it rather than just simply enjoin patience on the victim. Because suffering and continuing to suffer from the memory of that and so on without doing anything about it is not going to help that much. People need people to talk to, they need to be able to get something off their chest, and more so they need for injustices to be righted. So if the imams can get involved in some way to make this right, then this is what becomes incumbent upon us.
I think that's very helpful. I just want to briefly go over some ways to address some situations. So what if people are going through a situation where they just feel like, there are too many expectations within the faith, and they just don't feel like being religious or being practicing is helping their life in any way?
Hmm. Of course, this is a slightly different issue than the personal
Of
trauma.
course, yeah.
This is now like there are too many expectations.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you know, in our whole series about a balanced approach to hadith, an outcome from that is that see, a lot of the details of Islam actually come from hadith, which
Mm-hmm.
are not altogether reliable. So we have to differentiate between what's reliable and what's not when we're dealing with the hadith. And you can also construct a very detailed list of regulations in Islam based on the hadith. And when we do that, even if the hadith was authentic, and if you do that, then you are actually creating a faith that is very difficult to live with practically and to get by smoothly. Like, you can't be smooth sailing with this. You always have to be looking over your shoulder to think, you know, did I do that right? Maybe I violated a rule that I wasn't aware of, because so many rules come from the hadith.
Mm-hmm.
So that's even if like all of the hadiths were authentic and giving us these rules. Now that we realize that the hadiths are not all authentic, then many of the rules are based on inauthentic hadith. But they're still given as rules. But the same problem occurs in that we're always looking over our shoulders thinking there might have been a rule that I'm not aware of, and maybe I just violated another rule right there. And those of the youth who start to take Islam seriously and they want to know all the rules and make sure to do everything right, everything by the book. They start out that way, but eventually they become radicalized because they realize that to follow all of those rules, you cannot really be very well integrated with society anymore. You have to be sort of an isolationist. You're there but not there. Like, you're there in a cursory level with society, but you're soon withdrawn to your cave, either to the mosque or the confines of your own apartment, where you have a sort of domain that you control, and everything here is 100% according to the book. But as soon as you step outside of these domains, you find that you are again facing violations of the law, mostly imposed upon you by others because you have no control. And what the youth will find is that even when they come to the mosque, they will find that things in the mosque are not exactly 100% by the book if you go by all of the detailed laws. And what has happened over time is that the elders have become attuned to the idea that you can't follow all of these detailed rules. It becomes too impractical, really difficult to live by. And so they have made adjustments to which they have become comfortable. The youth read the books and they find out that the elders are in violation. They start having a problem with the mosque itself. So there is this continued tension in the minds of those who are trying to do everything that they think that the religion says. And we have to step back, look at the big picture, and realize that God is a merciful God. He does not demand of us such strict compliance with every detailed law. There are important laws and not so important ones. So we should try to fulfill the important ones the best of our abilities, to the best of our abilities, and ask God to forgive us for the rest. But that lack of contentment and dissatisfaction comes as a result of trying one's best to live by all of the detailed laws.
And just as we wrap up, what if there's also just lack of contentment because just obviously maybe not super traumatic things that are happening, but just, you know, one thing going wrong after another, like, I don't know, loss of a job, not getting work, being unemployed, or if it's a student, not being able to get into the program that they want, like, you know, being addicted to drugs, for example, not sort of one thing after another is just going wrong.
Yeah, eventually one might get the idea God is not listening to my prayers, God is not, you know, I've been praying all this while, but God is not doing anything for me. It looks like maybe God does not exist. So these ideas can occur to a person, especially in the modern world in which atheism is being spread in a way not like before. So the response to that is for a Muslim to just keep his or her GPS signal, pointing in the right direction, realizing that yes, there is a God. God may have good reasons for allowing me to go through these difficulties. Yes, there is a test. One of the things I picked up from Mehruna Ghani's Facebook page is a slogan in which she asks God, why do you have me going through these turbulent waters? And God said, because your enemies don't know how to swim. So
Interesting.
it may be that we are going through difficulties, and we might be asking why us, like, whereas other people don't seem to have the same difficulties. Well, God may be giving us the difficulties because we are capable of overcoming those difficulties. Maybe other people are not. And God is in a way testing us to raise us to higher levels as a result of these tests. And we don't know what God has in store for us for the future, but we always pray for that which is best. But the difficulties that we go through one after another is not a proof that God does not exist. It's just, it could be a way of God testing us to give us something better in the long run. Or it could be that as a result of all of this and our remaining patient with this, that God will in fact give us an ample reward in the life hereafter, and that obviously will make every difficulty of this life fade by comparison.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shabir, for that wholesome discussion.
You're welcome.
If you want more of Let the Quran Speak, you can watch previous episodes or new ones by subscribing to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/QuranSpeaks. Stay updated by liking us on Facebook and following us on Twitter @Quran_speaks. And when you're on the go, listen to our podcast at QuranSpeaks.com.